Hey everyone, welcome to Momentum Online. My name is Reggie, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you're dropping in online via YouTube or our podcast, we invite you to connect with us. And we mean that genuinely. We would love to know more about you. So do me a favor, go to momentumcc.org/connect if this is your first time with us. You can fill out the digital connect card, learn more about who we are, and it also just offers a way for us to extend the conversation back to you to learn more about who you are. So again, momentumcc.org, connect with us in that way. Also, in today's message, if you feel led in any way or enjoy this experience via podcast or YouTube, there is a way to give digitally, and we just believe that generosity goes so much further through the power of God. So if you feel led to give, you can also do that online by going to momentumcc.org/giving. Now, we are in a series called Step Into the Water, and we are genuinely excited about this series because it's all about challenging our faith. What does it look like to actually step out into the water and walk with Jesus, experiencing the power and the presence of God and what He has for us? What does your next step of faith look like? That's what we're going to jump into today. So I want to invite you to enjoy today's message.
Chance to meet. My name is Bart, and as Micah said, we're continuing our series. We're wrapping up today, really, our series called Step Into the Water. A little over a year ago, our family made a journey into something we'd never done before. We got our first dog. And so our little Shiloh, she's just a little bit over a year old, and I started thinking today of how many little just one-word phrases I have to say to her all the time, like sit, stay, shake. Even Lexi's got this thing where she'll pray. So we'll say pray, and she prays, release, go potty, or else like come or here. And I was just thinking about that. And the same is true with Jesus. Like a lot of times He just gives us these simple little one-word commands like love, listen, serve, seek, pray, peace, way, truth, life, follow, walk. And I got to think about that in this series, that God isn't always inviting us to walk with Him. But most of the time when we walk with God, it will also lead to a point where we've got to take a big step. We've got to step into the water. I think it's an invitation to everyone who wants to kind of step out in a new way or a big way into faith. Somebody who wants to experience more of the power and the presence of God. And so maybe God is calling you to be strong and courageous in a brand new season. But whatever it is, that step into the water moment is going to come for all of us when God is calling us. And in this series, we've been giving you 3 simple little one-word kind of challenges. Simply this: pray, listen, and respond. And we've been challenging you to step into the water. We've been saying first, hey, don't just take off first. Why don't you pray and really talk with God and listen to God, to maybe what He might be saying. Hey, this is the step I have for you, or this is the step of faith I'd like you to take. This is your step into the water moment. And then we've been challenging these last 2 weeks to kind of really respond, that you would pray, you would listen, and then you would respond. We've got 2 creative ways that we're wanting you to kind of even step into that response. One is this QR code here. And if you do that, there's a TV in the lobby. And if you put your next step in there, that TV thing is called a word cloud, and it's populating all of our next steps. So we would love for you to do that. There's QR codes on the TV out there. You can do it. But just kind of us all visually putting out our next step. Now, here's one I think I want to challenge you to. Is as you're thinking about your next step, be as concrete as you can be. A lot of times we just say, well, I want to be better at this. But the better, more concrete I think you can be, the more action-oriented you can be, the easier it will be for you to actually take that step. And then a little later in the service today, there's 4 tables around the room, kind of near some of our communion tables, and there's a magnet. And it simply says, my next step is. And during our communion time, we hope you'll even take a moment. There's Sharpies there, and you'll write your next step on this magnet and put it up somewhere in home or work or wherever you're at school, where you keep that in front of you. And I'm saying, this is the next step God's called to me. How am I going to be faithful and obedient to that? Pray, listen, respond. Today, as I wrap up our series, I want to take a look at a story of a guy named Peter, who didn't just take a leap of faith by stepping into the water. He actually walked on water. And I think it's essential for all of us who want to discern God's call. We've got to overcome fear. We've got to take a faith risk. We've got to manage failure, and we've got to trust God completely. And so our prayer in this whole series has been that you would simply say yes to your step into the water moment. What if that step ends up being the greatest step of faith you've ever taken? What if it's a huge leap of faith that God is calling you to respond in a big way? Because Jesus calls Peter to take this huge leap of faith with one simple word. So if you got your Bibles, or if not, you got your Bible app, I'm going to have it on the screen too. Most of our story today is in Matthew 14. Mark also tells this story in Mark chapter 6. But for the most part, I'll be in Matthew 14. And verse 25 says this: in the fourth watch of the night. If you don't know what that is, in Jewish terms, that would have been about 3 to 6 a.m. in the morning. So in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, Jesus, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he, Jesus, said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. My question for you this morning is, when or where might Jesus be saying to you, "Come"? Asking you to step out of the boat and step into the water, to walk on water, to actually be saying to you, hey, this is your step into the water moment. Peter and his friends, the other disciples, they got into a little boat one afternoon to cross the Sea of Galilee. I don't know if you've ever done that, but in 2009, I got to do that. I got into a little boat to cross the Sea of Galilee. Of course, I had to take advantage of that moment. I just had to have my little Leonardo DiCaprio King of the World moment. So I stepped out to the front of the boat and did it. You know what I mean? So I did it. But Jesus wanted to be alone. So they're boating without him. Peter, the disciples, they don't mind. Those guys, many of those guys are fishermen. They'd been on boats their whole life. They liked him. But this evening, a storm blew in. Verse 24 tells us, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. Now, the day that I was on the Sea of Galilee, it was super calm, but there can be violent storms on the Sea of Galilee. The storms of the Sea of Galilee, they come really from three directions. They'll come from the east, the south, and the west. But the storms that originate from the east are the strongest storms. In fact, today, they still cause fear and apprehension among local fishermen when they come from the east, because those storms can have winds up to 30 miles an hour. And it was so violent that the only thing the disciples could do in this moment was just keep the boat upright. They wished that the walls were a little higher, right, and the wood a little thicker. And by 3 a.m., I would imagine disciples weren't worried about making it to the other side. They're just saying, how do we stay alive? And then one of the disciples notices, hey, there is a shadow moving towards us. And as it got closer, it was apparent that it's not just a shadow, it's a figure of a human being walking on the water. Now, we read that, right? We've gone maybe through Sunday school, we've grown up, we've seen little images of stories and stuff, but can you just take a moment and let that image sink in? Like you're in a boat in the middle of a storm and you see someone walking on the water towards you. The disciples, man, they're freaking out. They're in distress. And the very person who's able to help them is actually approaching them. Only he wasn't in the boat. And the disciples didn't recognize him. And amazingly enough, none of this seems to slow Jesus down at all. Matthew, I think, wants us to recognize that sometimes it takes faith to see that Jesus is still around. Often in the middle of the storm, when you're tormented by waves of disappointment, frustration, and doubt, we're not any better at recognizing the presence of Jesus as they were. The real question is, though, why was Jesus walking around the lake at 3 o'clock in the morning? Mark tells us that he intended to pass them by. Listen to this, Mark 6:48. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and he meant to pass them by. David Garland points out that the verb here that is perikomai, it's to pass by in the Greek. It's used as a technical term to refer to something that's called a theophany. A theophany is those defining moments when God makes a striking and temporary appearance on earth, in the earthly realm, to maybe a person or a small group of people for the purpose of communicating a message, okay? When God put Moses in the cleft of the rock and he said, hey, when my glory passes by, you'll feel it and see it. And the Lord passed before him. God had told Elijah to stand on a mountain, for the Lord is about to pass by. There's a pattern to these stories. In each of these, God was trying to get someone's attention through a burning bush, through wind or fire or walking on the water. But with each of these stories, these moments, God was calling someone to do something extraordinary. And in each of these moments, guess what? The person felt super afraid. I mean, they were freaked out. But every time that happened, that person said yes to their calling and experienced the power of God in their life. So when Jesus comes to the disciples on the water, he's intending to pass them by. He's not just doing this clever little magic trick. He is revealing his divine presence and power, because only God can do such a thing. Only he can walk on the waves of the sea. That's interesting, because you get back to the beginning of this story, the disciples entered the boat at Jesus' command. Matthew 14, verse 22, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. I think that's a cool point that Jesus sent them on, because they had to learn what you and I have to learn, that obedience is no guarantee that we'll be spared adversity. Obedience is no guarantee that we'll be spared adversity. So now the storm has their full attention, and Jesus, he decides that it's time for them to get to know a little more about the guy who they've been doing life with. It's like he reassured them, right? As my kids would say to me, bruh, you could trust me, right? You know? I mean, my kids love. I saw a post the other day where this guy, dad, drives up to a drive-thru and his girls are in the back and he uses every possible slang term he can, and they are just dying. Like, they're like, what the Sigma? You know what I mean? I mean, so some of you gotta really have to look some stuff up later, right? But he's like, bro, you can trust me. You know my character. You know my competence. You can safely place your destiny, your lives in my hand. Take courage, it's me. Matthew wants, I think, you and I to know, as we read the stories, that Jesus often comes where he's least expected. 3 a.m., the middle of a storm, walking on the water. A divinely appointed moment where he often then even still comes to you and me, where he will still ask his followers today to do extraordinary things. And if you're not looking for him, you might just miss him. Peter was about to have his step into the water moment, and he recognized that God was present in this most unlikely place and circumstance. He realized, hey, this is an opportunity for me to have an extraordinary spiritual adventure. He realized this is a moment that my faith actually might get to grow. And so Peter just blurts out to the water walker, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And I always wondered, why does Matthew include this detail? Why doesn't Peter just jump into the water? Like cannonball, I think it's for a very important reason. This is not just a story about risk-taking, but it's a story about obedience. This means I will have to discern between an authentic call from God and what might be just a simple, foolish impulse on my part. That courage alone is not enough. That it must be accompanied by wisdom and discernment. So I think what Matthew wants us to understand here, he's not glorifying risk-taking for its own sake. Jesus is not looking for bungee jumping, hang gliding, day trading, tornado chasing, adrenaline junkies. Water walking is not something that Peter does for recreational purposes. This is not a story about extreme sports. It's a story about extreme discipleship. That means that before Peter gets out of the boat, he better make sure, hey, Jesus, do you think this is a good idea? This means that he's making sure, like, if I'm going to step into this, Lord, are you calling me to this? He asks for clarity. If it's you, command me to come. And in the darkness, I think Jesus might have even smiled, maybe even laughed, because he's thinking at least one person in the boat got it. See, Peter had some inkling of what his master was doing. Not only Peter had enough faith to believe that he could share in the adventure of not only stepping into the water, but walking on the water. It would have been incredible to walk on the water on a calm, sunny day, right? But Peter, out in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm, steps out. I mean, the sea was angry that day, my friend, Put yourself in Peter's place for a moment. You have sudden insight. You're kind of starting to get it. Oh, this is what Jesus is doing. The Lord is passing by. He's inviting me into an adventure, but at the same time, you're freaked out. You're scared to death. So what would you choose, the water or the boat? Because the boat is safe and it's secure and it's comfortable and the water's rough and the waves are high and the wind is strong and it's definitely a storm out there. But if you get out of the boat, whatever your boat might be, there's a good chance that you might sink. But if you don't get out of the boat, there's a guaranteed certainty that you will never walk on water. To step into the water, to walk on the water, you have to get out of the boat. You have to get off the shore. You have to take a step. So let me ask you a very important question this morning. What is your boat? What is your boat? Your boat represents whatever it is for you that is safety and security. Your boat is whatever you are so tempted to put your trust in, especially when life gets a little stormy and hard. Your boat is whatever keeps you so comfortable that you don't want to give it up, but it keeps you from joining Jesus on the waves. Your boat is whatever pulls you away from a high adventure of extreme discipleship. So you want to know what your boat is? Here's the best way. Your fear will tell you. Your fear will tell you. Just ask yourself this: what produces the most fear in me, especially when I think of leaving it behind and stepping out in faith? Is it your vocation? Is it job, career? Is it a relationship? Is it a secrecy, something you've been keeping in secret? Is it a person or people? Maybe you lead people and you think, oh, if I step out, how will it affect them? Is it success? What is your boat? In what area of your life do you tend to shrink back from courageously trusting and following God? Your fear will tell you what it is. And leaving it behind may be the hardest thing that you ever do. But if you want to step into the water, if you want to walk on water, you have to get out of the boat. And when we step out of the boat, we've got to expect problems, right? Then he saw the waves. It says, then Peter saw the waves. The storm was there all along. And we all know what it is to see the wind, right? You begin this full adventure, a new hope. You're going to try something new. You're stepping out. Maybe it's a new job, or maybe you finally stepped in and I feel like this is where I'm spiritually gifted. And so I'm going to start using my gifts. Or maybe you're trying to serve God a new way. And at the beginning, man, you're so full of faith and you're so excited and you get up and you're ready to go. Let's take on the world. It's blue skies. And then reality sets in. There's a setback, or there's an opposition, or there's an unexpected obstacle, and you see the wind. And that should be expected, right? The world is a pretty stormy place, but somehow trouble still has the power to catch you and I by surprise. And because of the wind, some people decide to never get out of the boat. But if you get out of the boat, if you step away from the shore, you will face the wind and the storm out there. But you might as well know that there is no guarantee that life in the boat or life on land is going to be any safer. I mean, did Peter fail? Well, I suppose in a way he did. I mean, his faith wasn't strong enough. His doubts were stronger. He saw the wind. He took his eyes off of where he should have been. He sank. He failed. But here's what I think. Is there were 11 bigger failures sitting in the boat. They failed quietly. They failed privately. Their failure went unnoticed, unobserved, uncriticized. Only Peter in this moment knew the shame of public failure. But I think Peter knew two other things really well. Only Peter knew the glory of walking on water. He alone knew what it was attempt to do something that he was not capable of doing on his own. And the second thing he knew was he experienced the excitement of being empowered by God to actually do it. See, once you step into the water, you never forget it for the rest of your life. It's hard to believe that it's almost 18 years now since we moved here to plant Momentum. You know, you got to know that I was very comfortable in a position at a large growing church in Louisville and where all of our family lived. I literally told God, I'm not church planting. I literally said those words. And we stepped out. First, I stepped off staff, not even knowing what I was going to do. I said, I think I'm done. I think God's calling us. And I remember Jody's dad saying to me, you usually have another job lined up before you quit that job. I said, I know, and I'm like, but God was working and moving. It was the scariest thing we have ever done. But it was the greatest thing we've ever done. And I think Peter carried that joyous moment with him to the grave. Only Peter knew the glory of getting lifted up by Jesus in a desperate moment of need. Peter knew what the others could never have known, that when he sank, Jesus would be completely able to save him. He had this shared moment, a shared connection, a shared trust in Jesus that none of the others had. They couldn't because they didn't even get out of the boat. The worst failure is not to sink in the waves. The worst failure is to never get out of the boat. And they never stepped into the water. And as soon as Peter asked for help, Jesus is there. He helps him physically pulls him up out of the water. But he also helps Peter grow because he points something out. He pinpoints this problem in Peter's life. Matthew 14, verse 31, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took a hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got in the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." You of little faith, why did you doubt? I don't think Jesus was being harsh here. I don't even think Jesus was being critical here. In fact, it's the one detail that I kind of love about this story is that Jesus makes this comment to Peter, if you read it right, while they're still alone on the water. The text says that only after this did they get into the boat. And what I see in that is that Jesus, like any good mentor, any good person that's pouring into someone else, he doesn't want to embarrass Peter. in front of the other disciples. So in the privacy of the moment and in the safety of his strong right hand, he gently helps Peter locate the source of his problem. And it was simple. It was quite clear. Whether Peter sank or swam depended on whether he focused on the storm or on Jesus. So now Peter understood an obedience and faith in a much deeper level that he never would have known if he had never left the boat. It was his willingness to risk failure that helped him to grow. Because Peter puts himself in a position to fail, he also puts himself in a position to grow. Failure is an indispensable, irreplaceable part of learning and growth. I love what author and pastor John Ortberg says. He says, failure does not shape you the way you respond to failure shapes you. This is a story about risk, but it's also a story about waiting. The disciples had to wait in the boat until the storm, they had to wait till the storm came in the fourth watch of the night before Jesus came to them. Even for them, it's not till the very end of the passage that they finally get what they were hoping for, relief from the storm. Why couldn't Jesus made the wind die down before Peter got out of the boat? Well, maybe because like us, they needed to learn something about waiting. In some ways, waiting on the Lord is the hardest part of trusting. You know, I firmly believe that God answers our prayers. Sometimes it's a yes, sometimes a no, but a lot of the time it's wait. And it's not the same as waiting around. It's putting yourself in complete vulnerability in his hands. It's not like I'm just sitting here trying to wait around. No, I'm trusting in him completely. Jesus is still looking for people to get out of the boat, to get off the shore, to step into the water today. And so why would you and I risk that? Well, I believe there's several reasons. You're stepping into the water. It is the only way to real growth. If you take a step of risk that God's calling to you, I think it's the only way for real growth. It's the only way that your true faith develops. I would say that it's an alternative to boredom and stagnation that causes many people just to wither up and die because their faith is never challenged or growing. And I think stepping into the water is part of discovering and obeying your calling. I believe there's a lot of good reasons to step into the water, and we've been sharing lots of them through this series, but I think there is one that trumps them all. The water is where Jesus is. The water's where Jesus is. It may be dark, it may be wet, it may be dangerous, but Jesus is not in the boat. Jesus is not on the shore. And the main reason I believe that Peter got out of the boat is because he wanted to be where Jesus was. Matthew keeps referring to this reality. Peter's request is, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you in the water. And he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. Because Peter did this, he and his friends had a greater understanding of the master than they ever had before. They came to see, hey, we can place our trust in him. We can place our future in his hands. And I believe that's God's most common method for growing a deep, adventuresome faith in us, is asking us to step into the water and get out of the boat. More than having a great talk, I heard this great message, or more than reading a great book, I think God's going to use real life challenges to develop our ability to trust him. But we tend to seek out a world of comfort. We try to construct these manageable, comfortable lives with some sense of security and predictability so that we can maintain this illusion. I'm in control. Then God passes us by and shakes everything up. Because the call to get out of the boat, it involves this. I can promise you this: crisis, opportunity, often failure, usually fear, sometimes suffering, and always a calling that is too big for us. But there's no other way to grow faith than to partner with God. Maybe you can think back and there was this time in your life when you just felt like, man, I was walking on water on a regular basis. It was happening all the time. This moment when your heart felt so much like Peter's, just like, command me, tell me to come to you. There was this time when you would risk sharing your faith, even if it meant somebody rejected you. I've got to tell them about this Jesus changed my life. Maybe there's this time where you just felt so generous and you felt so giving, even if it meant sacrifice. Maybe there was a season in your life where you were serving and it was just filling you up and you felt like you were using your gifts and even you were serving even if it meant the possibility of failure. Sometimes you sank, sometimes you soared, but you lived on the edge of faith. And maybe you're here, sitting here today and you're going, you know what? I haven't been in the water for a long time. I have built a really nice boat. It's got these padded deck chairs and stabilizers, and I never get seasick in the storm. And maybe you've just gotten comfortable sitting in your boat. Maybe you've got this great spot on the shore. You've got your chair, your lounger, your umbrella, you got your Yeti cooler, the breeze feels good, you've got a Bluetooth speaker playing, and the view is spectacular. But the Lord is passing by. And Jesus is still looking for people who will step into the water. I don't know what this means for you. But if you get out of your boat, if you step off the shore, you will have problems, you will have struggles. There's a storm out there. Your faith will not be perfect. Risk always holds the possibility of failure. But if you step out, I can guarantee you that two things will happen. The first is that when you fail, and you will fail sometimes, is that Jesus will be there to pick you up. You will not fail alone. You will find that he is wholly adequate to save you. And the second thing I think you'll discover is that every once in a while, you will walk on water. So you want to do something courageous? Step into the water. There's a powerful question I heard many years ago that helped me always answer this question. Am I stepping out in faith? Am I stepping into the water? It's simply this: what am I doing that I could not do apart from the power of God? What am I doing that I could not do apart from the power of God? If God doesn't show up, this is going to fail. I can't tell you how many times we said that when we were launching this church, because we were in way over our heads. We didn't have any clue what we were doing. And we were just like, if God doesn't show up, this is going to be a nightmare. This is going to be a mess. What am I doing that I could not do apart from the power of God? And can I just tell you what the biggest danger is? Comfort. Comfort. I think if you were to ask Peter that question, his answer would be very simple and straightforward. It was clear that the only way I was going to stay afloat is if God took over. So how about you? Is there any challenge in your life that is large enough that you have no hope of doing it if God doesn't show up? And if not, here's what I'd ask you to consider: that maybe you are living kind of under-challenged right now. That if you want to walk on water, you've got to be willing to get your feet wet first. Then you discover that it's worth the risk. God promised Moses and the Israelites freedom, and he delivered them from Pharaoh. But first they had to do a step, an act of trust. They had to march to the Red Sea, and before he parted it, over and over in Scripture, this pattern is repeated. They had to step into the water to lead the people of God into the promised land. Joshua had to, are there some priests who'd be willing to lead the way and step into the water of the Jordan? Naaman, to be healed and restored, was told, you've got to wash in the water 7 times before you can be cured of leprosy. John the Baptist stepped into the water to baptize Jesus. And then in this moment, you know what he was saying? He must increase, I must decrease. He was the domestique for Jesus. We talked about this last week. A domestique in cycling is the rider who rides so that the other person can win. Peter got out of the boat, stepped into the water, and became a water walker. And if you and I are going to experience a greater measure of God's power in our life, it will usually involve the first step principle. It will usually begin with me acting in faith, taking that step, trusting God to take a step of obedience. Simply acknowledging when my power is not enough, I have to get my feet wet. I mentioned John Ortberg. John Ortberg has this little illustration that I love. that we start in this original spiritual comfort zone, but each time we take a step, we step into an enlarged spiritual comfort zone. So what would it look like if you just take the first step? See, here's what I know to be true, that one of the most exciting spiritual adventures in life is helping another human being find God. There's nothing more exciting. So let me give you a couple key questions for today. What am I doing today that I could not do apart from the power of God in my life? How would you describe your faith these days? What might help you get to know God better? What is one step you could take today to enlarge your spiritual comfort zone? And again, don't just kind of be vague or ethereal about your step. What's a concrete step? Hey, I could take today, I could do this. And what is one area of our community? Maybe what is one cause? Maybe is one need that kind of stirs in you, but it's so big, it's bigger than you, but you'd be willing to just start praying over that for the next 6 months. Don't do anything, just pray. And then listen and then respond. And if you can't think of something, I'm just going to ask you to do something right now. I mean, we're almost ready to break ground on a new facility for our Forsyth campus, but we're still really wrestling and investigating what's the next move for this campus. I would just ask you, hey, it's bigger than us, and we need God to step in and do this. So I would just ask you to be praying. If you don't have something to pray about that, God, what would you have us do here at this campus so we continue to reach the ones in our community, serve our community, and enlarge our kingdom here, your kingdom here. When someone steps into the water, when someone gets out of the boat, when someone steps off the shore, they're never quite the same. Your worship is never quite the same. Your world is never quite the same. And whatever the result is, whether you sink or you swim or you walk on water, here's what I tell you, something will have changed. Something will have changed because Jesus is not finished yet. He's still looking for people who would dare, who would take a risk to trust him. I believe this is your chance of a lifetime where you step into the water and when you take that step of faith, because I believe wholeheartedly it is worth the risk. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for just challenging us today and over the last few weeks. That you've got this pattern of using water as an illustration of just being a step of faith. And so, God, as we've just used that visual, may you challenge us now. We've been praying, we've been listening, and I think now the call is to respond, to come, to step out of the boat. So, God, what I'm praying in this moment is you'd give clarity to each and every person of what their next step is. No matter what it is. Because God, sometimes the most faithful and the highest risk steps are small steps, behind the scenes steps that nobody even sees. But whatever it is, would we hear it from you and would we take that step forward? Would we enlarge our faith? Would we allow our faith to grow? We step into that moment where if you don't show up, it fails. I don't believe there's any greater place to be. And God, that's my prayer this morning. Love you. It's the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Hey, we really hope you enjoyed today's message. Again, my name is Reggie. It's been a pleasure to be your host, and we hope and pray that you were challenged by today's message, Step Out in Faith. There's several ways to do that, but one of the reminders I want to drop in front of you is just to go to momentumcc.org/giving if you do feel led to give, if this message spoke to you in that way. Also, stepping out in faith requires stepping out into community and things like that. So if you would like to connect with us, as a reminder, momentumcc.org/connect will push you to our digital connect card where you can fill that out to hear more about us, our heartbeat, and we get to learn more about you. But we also just really want to extend the invitation to walk in faith alongside you in person. So if you would like to join us in person at either of our campuses, just go to momentumcc.org and you can find out more info on our gathering times and our spaces and locations. You can also feel free to just continue to follow us online. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us via podcasts and drop in on some other messages and other series that we've been in. It all just points back to Jesus. And so our prayer is that you would step into the water and walk in faith alongside Jesus. We will see you again soon. Thanks for joining us. Peace.